All right. Well, hey, everybody, either on Zoom or in the room, thank you so much for spending your morning with the Writing Center. My name's Eddie Horan, and I coordinate. I've been in this position for 2 years with the retirement of course, the legendary Pam Cross. Over the past 2 years, I've done some investigation of what the Writing Center does, what our best practices are, and a closer look at some of the theory undergirding the Writing Center and what we do and why we do it. Since Writing centers became popular in the 70s. There's been a sort of woe is me attitude among writing centers of, oh, people don't understand what we do. And you can see different variations of this, written in different decades over time. And so I feel that from time to time it's good because it's not just writing centers, but actually the idea of writing itself is often misunderstood. I'll give you the example of a student I met in the Writing Center this past spring who was getting very, very anxious because one of the tutors was suggesting that one of his sentences was a little long, and so he might want to break it into 2 sentences. And he kept saying, no, no, no. This is a paragraph. This is my 5th sentence. I can't add a 6th sentence. And he was getting, quite angry about it. So I said, okay, come on with me. Come and talk with me. So I brought him into my office and I'm thinking to myself, this must be a first-year student, who's coming from high school and they had some pedantic teacher who's taking this, we're going to write a 5-paragraph essay and every paragraph is going to start with a topic sentence and every one of those paragraphs is going to have 4 sentences after that topic sentence and that's it. But no, he was actually a senior. He had finished his writing career at Stockton. And I was flabbergasted by that. And I really should have gone back through our logs over the past couple of years and seen, had he worked with us before, or who had been what classes had he taken in writing at Stockton and so on. Had he transferred from elsewhere where he took care of some of those requirements and, all that to say that writing is so often misunderstood. So we're going to talk a little bit in today's presentation. I'm going to give you a virtual tour of the Writing Center. I took a few pictures. How many people are familiar with Stockton's Writing Center, like the physical space? Right. And if you're not, you'll get a taste of it today, at least. So we'll start there. We're going to look at some theory and practice in the Writing Center and how that plays out, both writing and Writing Center. Then we're going to sort of morph that into, okay, considering these ideas about writing and the Writing Center, what should students expect during peer writing sessions? When they come to work with one of the peer writers in the Writing Center, what should they have done already? What should they expect to have happen while they're there? And then finally, we're going to apply that to your classroom. How many folks teach writing intensive courses ever? How many people don't teach writing intensive courses but require their students to do some writing? Right. So we'll look at how some of that may play out in your classes. I'll make some suggestions. So let's start with our quick glance at the Writing Center. First, these are our peer writers in the Writing Center. They come from a variety of programs at Stockton. We have biochemists, we have literature majors, we have folks who are going into education. They're across the spectrum, and that's what we hope for in a healthy writing center. I do have one more tutor who is not pictured here. And then I have Archie, is down here. Archie is my dog. I should mention, if we go back, anybody ever go to a Pam Cross presentation? Pam loved to use pictures of her dogs. I always thought that was a great idea because who doesn't love animals? Yeah, okay, maybe you don't. I'm not going to force it on you. But this presentation does feature my dog Archie and my 2 cats, Jim Cat and Baby Girl. So you will be seeing them throughout the presentation. Just a quick introduction. Here's Archie sitting on the chair. There's Jim Cat in the first window and Baby Girl in the center window. Okay, the important stuff is out of the way. We can all go. No, okay. Here we go. So peer writers. Here is a picture of the Writing Center taken from the door. You can see it's not an enormous space. right? We have 4 round tables. We have a couple computers. If you have in fact, I'm going to off the lights. There we go. If you have a keen eye, you might notice there's a coffee maker on the far left. Most of the times that your students come to work with our peer writers, they'll probably be seated at one of these round tables. Right over here, which is the opposite side of the room, you'll see that we have some resources, which, I mean, frankly, today, most of this is all online, and you can be guaranteed that it will be updated if you find it in the right place online versus some old books that, we don't necessarily have the budget to update, but they're there. Faculty are welcome to borrow from these books, too. I'm also showing you sort of more of this wall because we do online tutoring in addition to in-person tutoring. So you'll notice our computer here. This is where tutors facilitate online writing sessions. Students can zoom into the writing center and work virtually during any of the hours that we're open. We'll have tutors in the physical room, and they'll be monitoring that for a little chime from Zoom, and they'll hop on and join whoever has joined them. We also make space not only at the round tables, but this little table here is popular. We encourage students to come in and write independently. So if they want to come and find a quiet place to write, but they don't necessarily have any questions for a peer writer just yet, they can sit and work independently. And then if they get to a point where they have questions or they want to talk about something that they're putting together, they're welcome to do that. Of course, again, we have limited space, so we have to balance those needs. I have a hope that someday we'll have a little bit more space and the Writing Center can be sort of like a mainstay of students' writing experiences at Stockton. But for now, that is a pipe dream. You'll also see we have kind of a little bit of a living room setup going on here. This is deliberate, and I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. We're going to look at this picture again after we've looked at some of the theory. And then we've got 2 more computers in the back corner with the comfiest chairs in the room. So that's the Writing Center. Here's Archie looking a little bit derpy, but here starts the first part. We're going to explore some of the theory and practice of the Writing Center. First, we're going through, so as I mentioned, I took over this position 2 years ago. I spent kind of my first year evaluating what we were doing. I spent my second year making small tweaks here and there. I've completely redesigned the peer writer training course. If you're unfamiliar with that, all our peer writers at Stockton go through a semester-long course where we look at writing and writing centers, and they also do some hands-on time in the writing center, sort of getting that hands-on practice. But so I've completely redesigned that. And you'll notice I'm going to slip up because I've made a recent change in terminology, and we're going to come back to the theory about this a little, or the theory behind this a little bit later. But in the writing center, we're moving away from the terms tutor and tutor. And again, I'll come to the theory and a little bit of data behind that later. So for now, how I'm referring to our writing tutors is peer writers. I know that that's kind of a nondescript term and it requires explanation. In part, that's deliberate. I'll get to that. And in some ways, we'll see how it goes. I'm experimenting. What I know is that I do want to move away from the terms tutor and tutoring based on some research I've done. What exactly that term will end up being, I've got 40 years to decide. So check in another couple decades. Tutoring session has become pure writing session or writing center session. And again, you might hear me from time to time say the tutors, or you might hear me say a tutoring session. Old habits die hard. Okay, I'm giving it my best try here. Let's start by looking at what a peer writing session is. And as I say here, the short ideal version is that essentially it's a conversation between two writers. In our case, one who has gone through a semester-long training course about writing in writing centers, and one who is coming probably with the goal of clarifying some of their writing, figuring out if what they're doing is effective or not. We have several goals that go into this conversation. So it's not just a freewheeling conversation, but there's several goals. First, we want the tutor, there I go. We want the peer writer to help the student tap back into their prior writing experiences, writing they've done independently, feedback they've gotten, if they've ever worked with a peer writer before, and apply what they learned to this tutoring session. There I go. And it's even written there too. Again, old habits, right? You're not going to fault me for it, are you? I hope not. I'm trying. So we have that goal. We're also we are reflecting on a piece of their writing and the specific moves they make in it. So what are you doing in this piece of writing to achieve your purpose, right? And how do you see those achieving your purpose? Did you think about any other ways of potentially doing that? And what made you land on this particular way over, say, this other option? After we get through that piece of writing, the peer writer wants to help the student plot some achievable next steps and revisions. Achievable is the operative word there, right? Because working with a peer writer in the writing center doesn't mean voila, okay, now you have an A paper, right? And we'll come to that a little bit deeper in a moment. And then finally, we also want to prime that writer to transfer this tutoring experience at present, not just to their next steps in terms of revision, but their future writing situations. So what did you learn during this session with a peer writer that you can use in your writing moving forward? Right? I'll talk today about the fact that peer writers ask a lot of questions. What questions did the peer writer ask you that you should ask yourself as a writer, right? That help you sort of develop your own intentionality. I'm wondering, looking at these goals, this sort of description of what a peer writing session looks like, is there anything you expect to see here, and is there anything that surprises you? All right, cool. What I sometimes find there is that often, and this is more common with students who come to work with us. They expect kind of what I was hinting at a moment ago. Oh, we're going to fix my paper, right? And really, the paper itself or the piece of writing itself is only a vehicle for these things. Now, as a side effect, usually, almost always, a writer is going to lead with an improved essay. Right? They're going to have talked about things that are going to help them move forward and help them make some better moves. Okay, that's going to happen. But again, it doesn't mean that they're going to leave there with an A or an A paper, right? And that is not our goal. And that's not how learning writing works anyway. Okay, which brings me to our credo. We work with writers, not texts. Exactly what I just said. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about transfer. Oh, I made a rookie mistake in this presentation, and it's even funnier because I'm the writing center guy. You'll see that from time to time I've cited a couple sources. Guess who forgot to give you all the information about the sources at the end? This guy, yep. But I'd be happy to refer you to these sources later on.
But you did mention them, so if I were grading your paper, I could in good faith say, well, you're not trying to pull a fast one on me. You just slipped up in terms of your documentation.
Thank you, Professor. I appreciate the understanding and humanness.
Don't let it happen again.
So I'm not going to find a charge of academic dishonesty in my life. Not this time. Okay, wonderful. Okay. So when we talk about transfer in education, and many of you are probably aware of transfer, we're talking not really about learning, but the repurposing of something that you learned for new contexts. And I cite here, that Elizabeth Wardle says that perhaps some better terms for transfer would be repurposing, transforming, generalizing, recontextualizing. As one example that I believe comes from the DeVay article, but at this point they're kind of bumping around in my brain, is if you're working on something that requires a screwdriver. Let's suppose it's a flathead screwdriver, and you don't have a screwdriver handy. Has anybody ever used a butter knife? Right, or a credit card, right, or something like that, or
A quarter.
or a quarter, exactly, right? You have learned, right, what a screwdriver does, what it looks like, what it has to achieve, and you have transferred that to a different object, right, that you can use for that, to achieve that goal, right? Transfer is at the center of what writing centers do. Again, if we think about that goal or our credo, we work with writers, not writing. The goal is to help writers, first of all, get new writing experiences, again, that they can use moving forward. That's exactly what transfer is. And peer writers help facilitate transfer on a couple levels. As I mentioned earlier, they help writers tap into what they've done in the past and bring that to the tutoring session. Oh, there I go again with tutoring. Again, they help them think about what happened during the peer writing session and apply that to their future writing situations. And then again, to take those future writing situations and hearken back to them at future dates, right? Peer writers also engage in their own transfer. Again, this is part of learning, right? So we have from, again cited in DeVay, but coming from Haskell, peer writers engage in content-to-content transfer. So for example, I mentioned that in our writing center, our peer writers come from varying majors, varying programs. They tap into their content experience in their programs, and they repurpose that for a peer writing situation. If they're working with somebody, for example, in a class they've taken before, that's a natural place for that to happen. But even so, if you are, let's say, a criminal justice major, you're a tutor who's a criminal, there you go, you're a peer writer who's a criminal justice major, and you're working with a writer who is what did I just say? Criminal justice? Yeah. As a psychology major, right? You're both in the social and behavioral sciences. There are going to be certain norms that go into some of that writing, and perhaps even some of the sorts of genres of writing you've been exposed to, right, might come into play. So they engage in content-to-content transfer, but they also engage in what's called procedure-to-procedure transfer, and that is the actual functioning of the peer writing session. I'm going to lay out in a little bit sort of the general path that a peer writing situation takes, and I'll put a little asterisk next to it because it's not linear. It goes all over the place. We go backwards, we go forwards throughout the session, and that's natural. But tutors over time, peer writers over time, right, become better peer writers because they transfer those past experiences with their peers to future ones. Okay. Here's I check in on my pets from time to time during the day. Archie, my dog, has terrible anxiety. And I'm generally not somebody who likes to have cameras around. But one of the recommendations that his doggy psychiatrist made was, yes, and he's on human strength and prescription medications, was get some cameras so you can check in with him from time to time. And from time to time, if I see my pets in there, I take a little screenshot. Here's Jim Cat having a little bath on the floor. And if you look carefully, you'll see baby girl curled up on the sofa. But they are immaterial. They have nothing to do with their rhetorical approach to writing. Some pictures, by the way, in this presentation will be related to the topics. Okay. Sometimes I'm thinking about the topic and I see this picture, I'm like, oh, this is beautiful. I have to use this picture for this purpose. It captures the essence of what I'm looking for. But not this one. This one is just, hey, cats. Okay. So often folks think of writing as being about a discrete set or a set of discrete skills, right? Folks think about mechanics, they think about organization, they think about X, Y, and Z, right? And sure, right, these things play a role in writing, but they're not writing itself, and more pointedly, they don't transfer the same from writing situation to writing situation. In rhetorical studies, we take an approach that we believe does transfer from writing situation to writing situation. And so we teach writers to be primarily focused on, and this is only a small sampling of a rhetorical approach to writing, by the way, just a few terms that I'm putting up here. Purpose, audience, and genre, right? So any piece of writing that you do hopefully has some kind of purpose, right? Whether it's your grocery list, is the purpose to remind you of what to get and where to get it in the grocery store and so on, to a scholarly article that you might be submitting for publication. They all are going out there into the world and hopefully doing something, right? So we teach writers to think about what is it that you want to reasonably achieve with this piece of writing? What difference can you make by putting this piece of writing out into the world, right? Thinking, again, along those lines, to whom or for whom, right? Whom are you hoping to reach with this piece of writing? What do they know already? What do they expect to see, and so on? And of course, genre, thinking about the type of writing that you're doing and the constraints on that writing, right? That anytime you're tapping into a genre, you're looking at things you've done in the past along those lines, right? When students write you, for example, a missing class email, right? There are certain things you expect to see. Hi, I'm missing class. I'm keeping up on Blackboard, right? Thanks. Or maybe you hope to see other things. But at any rate, it's a type of writing, and there are past experiences that go into it. Right? Tutors also talk a lot, peer writers also talk a lot about moves, right? And moves are those specific things that you are doing in your writing to help achieve a particular purpose. Intentional choices you make about how to make a point or stress a point. And very important, we think about process and the fact that writing is not about what you put together at the end of the day. It's about how you go through that writing situation. It's about how you move forward from thinking about it to executing it and seeking feedback and making changes and rethinking it and making more changes, right? A myth. Students don't have to have finished pieces of writing to work with us. This is more a myth for that students believe than anything else. And they actually don't even need to have anything physically written at all. Because again, an important part of that process is the planning stage and thinking through, okay, here's my task, here's what I need to achieve, and charting some potential ways of going about doing that. Anytime I get the chance to talk with students at Stockton, I stress that stage of the process. Come early on. Come when you just have ideas. Talk it through. And then, right, because again, a session with a peer writer isn't about creating a perfect piece of writing, right? Make time to come back again later on. Talk through the peer writer about your ideas about how you want to achieve your goal. Start to work on those and then bring it back again. Right? Those are the smartest things your students can do, and what I hope that you will pass along to them and help us dispel that myth, right? That they don't have to have anything written to come work with a peer writer.
Doesn't that basically become a reflection on the idea that in their minds that you're there to fix something?
Absolutely.
Not to generate something, but to fix something.
Yeah.
And once they get past that, then it all makes sense.
Yeah. Why would I come to you to have something fixed if it doesn't exist? Exactly. Yeah.
It's a car.
Like, I called the plumber for my toilet that is not clogged, just in case I get a clog, you know. Can you wait here, plumber? Okay. This is one of those intentional pictures. Baby girl, or Mika, as she came to be named, she's very judgmental, and you can probably see that in this picture. I don't know, are you getting the judgment vibes here? I always feel like she is judging me, and she's going to claw me at any moment. But here she is sitting on her throne of judgment. And anyway, you don't have to literally, I know I say close your eyes here, you don't have to literally close your eyes. But what comes to mind? What images or what other words, what scenarios come to mind when I say the word tutor? Again, it's a word I've been trying to move away from in the writing center. What comes to mind for you when you hear tutor?
Like they're superior.
You get sort of like a
Yeah, they're not. We're not on the same level. Like,
who gets that? Like we are not peers, right? Or we may be peers, but there's this person has power or control in some way. What other things come to mind? Experience. Which, and in some ways, you'll see that these things are true. In some ways, and to some degree. But do we actually want to express that? And my argument is no, I don't think we do. For again, and we'll explore why. So that's really the part of the impetus behind my shifting ideas and terminology, and we'll look at some of that again in a moment. Writing centers have a long-standing disagreement over to what extent writing tutors, and here I'm deliberately using the word tutors as sort of the stand-in for writing centers for writing chambers. For writing centers more broadly. So we have this long-standing degree over this idea of the peer relationship. Should tutors embrace it, or should they embrace this sort of power dynamic? Different approaches, and you see, you know, at this point, which approach I want our writing center to take. It also, again, goes into this idea of novice and expert, right? That if I come to you, tutor, to work on my writing, it's because you will open your brain of knowledge and rain it down upon me so that I may be blessed, right? Or something like that. And we don't actually want that to be the case. Writing itself is collaborative. It's something that we do as part of a community. It doesn't occur in a vacuum. And I think that we want to emphasize that in the writing center by fostering more of these peer-to-peer relationships. We also think about the physical environment. Writing centers traditionally, at least those that try to push away that power dynamic or minimize that power dynamic, are sort of thinking about creating a cozy environment. So we come back to, you know, the sofa and chair that we showed earlier. And now I'll look at a couple of other more tangible things here. Last spring, so since the pandemic, right, writing center numbers have not returned to what they were before. In some instances, we've gotten close, but we haven't yet come back to the high water marks of before. I, of course, want there to be more going on in the writing center, and that's not to say that nothing's going on. That's not the case. Right? But I want this to be a busy place. Like I said, a place where students' writing experiences are sort of at the center, right, of that place. And I want to create that sort of environment. So in the spring, I visited, it totaled 39 classes that I visited, and I talked about the writing center. And I talked about, here's what we do. I made a big deal over the fact that you don't need to feel like you're struggling with your writing. It's not about that. I shared with them the fact that I always ask at that point I was using the term tutors. I always ask the tutors for input on my own writing. Here's my audience. Here's what I'm trying to achieve. Do you think this is working? Right? What suggestions do you have? Okay. So overall, I was in front of about 1,000 students over these 39 classes, give or take. And towards the end of the semester, I looked into our logs and I was trying to track how many students from these classes have actually come and worked with tutors. And it was a drop in the bucket. It wasn't nothing, right? But when you meet 1,000 students, you're not expecting 1,000 students to come, right? But I was hoping for more. So I created a survey. I wanted to figure out for those students who knew about the Writing Center but never came, why not? So I created a short survey, 5 minutes. One of the questions which had a write-in answer was, and it was on Qualtrics, so if they answered, I didn't come work with a tutor, it brought them to the next question, which was, why not? You knew it was there, why not? Right? And the number one write-in answer was, I didn't need it. And so I started to think about that power dynamic again. And I started to think about the perception that when we talk about writing tutors, right, that if working with a tutor is about struggling and being improved by somebody else, then working with that person is a confession that you are struggling. And how many people took a while in their lives to learn that that's okay? Right? I certainly wasn't like that when I was 18, 19, 20. And to what degree is that because we use tutoring terminology? Can't measure that. I don't know. But at any rate, I've been convinced by a lot of what I've read and what I've experienced to move away from that language. Writers, of course, also come to us with a certain level of expectations. I go absolutely bonkers in the practicum, the peer writer training course, over the concept of expectations, right? Because when writers come to work with tutors and they have opposing expectations, they're not going to leave happy. Right? And so if they're expecting that to work with a tutor is to have somebody who gives you the answers and makes you leave with a better piece of writing, right? They're not always going to see that while they didn't leave with a better paper, they're leaving in a better place with that assignment and for their future writing, right? That's more difficult to see. So we already talked about tutor versus peer writer. We talked about, yeah, we did. Hello. Okay. One thing that I've done a little bit longer, so while I've been in this position for 2 years, I've been training the peer writers for 6 years. And as long as I've been training the peer writers, I've actually had them avoid referring to the people with whom they work as students. When you refer to somebody in a particular way, you start to think of them in that way, right? And so I witnessed, both as a tutor myself when I was in college and as a Writing Center professional, I witnessed that having peer writers refer to the people they work with as students made them think of themselves as being in that teacherly role. So it sort of further ingrained that power dynamic. When students came to work in the Writing Center and they heard the tutors talking about student, right? I like better to send the idea that they're writers. They're here because they're writers, right? They're not here, because we have all the answers and they're learning from us. So that's been a more long-standing shift. That we've accomplished in the Writing Center. And then we have what I call the grandma's house theorem. And this is in some ways, this is based on my own lived experience and people's, experiences with their grandparents, if they were fortunate enough to have experiences with their grandparents, may be quite different from my own. But I always think of grandma's house as a comfortable place where you're going to eat some good food. You're going to sit on the sofa, read a book, right? Maybe play a game with grandma, maybe bake some cookies, okay? And so I call it only to myself. This isn't actually something that I express, but I think of the grandma's house theorem, again, thinking about not only the sort of vibe that we create in our behavior, but also in our physical space. Which is why when you walk into writing centers, not just our writing center, but writing centers broadly, you'll often see a sofa. You'll often see a coffee pot. You'll often see hand-me-down furniture or things that sort of express a certain level of casualness. right? Again, to sort of reinforce that relationship and create a comfortable environment where writers feel that they can benefit from being.
I think we should co-write and publish a grandma's house theorem, because for the library, I went on all these tours to study stuff for the renovations. And a lot of the places looked very sterile and hospital-like, cafeteria, and not cozy. And I felt like in the 21st century library renos, that was like, it's sterile. It's like everything's white and gray, like HGTV vibes. And this, I want to make sure we still have something like this, because I find that students, even in the old spaces, would gravitate towards like the dusty couches.
Yeah.
And there's something to be said for that. I think you're onto it. Yeah.
Let's
do it.
coin Grandma's house.
I think we should.
Okay. Oh, that's actually really fun. Okay. Oh, we have to talk.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see all kinds of memes about millennial rage. Like like people around my age who buy a house and then paint everything like gray and white and shade. And if you do, that's fine. You know, it's your house. But I live in a 100-year-old house, and shortly before I bought the house, somebody finally painted the brick fireplace white. And I wish every day that they hadn't.
In my house.
Yeah, but it is what it is. And it's very textured bricks, so I've tried a few ways of stripping the paint, and unless I bring a sandblaster into my living room, it's not going to happen, but I digress. Here's Archie having a little snooze with his little teethers hanging out. Another important idea that you're probably seeing pieces of, and what we've talked about already, is fostering agency among writers, right? So giving them the opportunity not to be told what to do, but to be given some options, be given some perspectives, talk through those perspectives, and then move forward and make an educated decision. Right. And that's what agency is about. This is, again, another longstanding writing center debate. How directive should tutors be? And you'll note that it's not how direct, but how directive. Peer writers are trained to be direct. Right? We don't want them, dangling answers like, I have an answer. Can you reach it? Like, if I ask you some questions, can you reach what I say is correct? I think that's a horrible dynamic. That would be being indirect, right? Directive, again, is about like, do I give you actual direction? Do this, cut that, put this in, right? Long-standing debate in writing centers. If you're interested, this is a seminal text from Jeff Brooks, which came out a few months before I was born. But it's called Minimalist Tutoring, Making the Student Do All the Work. You can get a sense from the title, if you've never read it before, of what it's about. It's horrifying. But this was like an approach that many writing centers gravitated to during the 90s, a much more directive approach, and making, like, he even talks in here about like reflecting the writer's body language. So if they're sitting back in their desk, the tutor should sit back in their desk. And if they ask a question, the tutor should say, I don't know what you think. Now, I think that a good writing center, and this is based on exploring both perspectives and so the training book that I use in the practicum is actually an older book. It's nearly 20 years old. It's The Longman Guide to Peer Tutoring by Gillespie and Lerner. But I still use it because it's still valued among writing centers. And they don't use the term scale of directiveness, but they talk about this idea that good peer writers balance how much direction they give the folks with whom they work. So our peer writers are trained to start a little bit less directive, asking questions and seeing what that's doing for the writer with them. If the writer's not responding to questioning, or they're not able to identify ways in which to answer that question, then the tutor slides up the scale and becomes a little bit more direct, right? And might point to something a little bit more concrete or say something more concrete. Okay. So thinking about all that, what can writers expect when they work with a peer writer? This is another one of those intentional photos. They can't expect Archie to be there in trouble for bringing him in first. That won't happen, alas. But you can probably tell he's like the friendliest boy in the entire world. I mean, everybody says that, but look at that little tongue hanging out. Anyway, writers can expect to be greeted by a friendly face, even if it's not Archie's. Part of Grandma's house theorem is actually a lesson from my grandmother, and I won't bore you with the whole story. It's one of those things that my grandmother, it wasn't a saying that she always said, it was something she said to me one time that really stuck. And she said, it never hurts to be friendly. And obviously, I think we've all learned that, or hopefully, we've all learned that, you don't do anybody any favors by being a grouch. And our peer writers are trained along those lines. 3 parts that writers can expect, and I'm going to kind of breeze through this because we're, we go to 11? 45. 45. Okay, so we're really going to breeze through this, right? You can think of a writing session as being broken into 3 stages, 3 episodes, as the lesbian learner referred to them. Or actually, no, they don't refer to this as episodes. But I think of it as background, reading and conversing, and plotting next steps. So if you think about those goals we had about transferring from past writing experiences to the present situation, that's what background is about. It's about introducing these 2 parties. It's about figuring out what is it that the writer is doing, what it is that they hope to accomplish in this session, right? If they've done any similar kinds of writing in the past. Then we move into the meat of the session, stage 2, which is where again, if we're looking at parts of the text that have already been written, right, where the peer writer and the student are working together to read through it, look at perhaps different parts if it's a particularly long piece, right, and talk about what's working, what's helping to achieve those goals, and what isn't. And then we wrap things up, and this is where we talk about transferring to the future. Right? What are our next steps? Right? So what now, having gone through this session, do you, writer, want to do? Right? And again, the scale of directiveness plays a role here. Right? If the writer wasn't responding to less direction, they needed a little bit more direction, the tutor's going to tell them, okay, here's some things that I think you should be working on moving. Right? And generally speaking, that is a best practice. Right? They probably won't tell, we'll get to that in a second. We'll skip past the fact that tutors ask a lot of questions in the interest of time. They also make a lot of statements, yada, yada, yada. And we'll skip right to menuing, and again, thinking about the role of agency, right? A peer writer might have a very clear sense of how they would go about addressing this particular assignment and what they would include, and so on. Right? But it's not up to them to tell the writer, here's what you should put in. Right? Instead, what they can do, what they have to be able to think about is not just how I, as a writer, would approach this, but what would be any reasonable way of approaching this particular writing situation. And so they do some menuing. Right? So they'll end the session by giving the writer some options, right? So we talked about X, Y, and Z. Here's some potential ways you could address that moving forward, right? From time to time, they might say, my own favorite would be X, right? But that's a decision that you as a writer have to make. Again, there's still a power dynamic there. And sometimes if a writer hears, this is what I would do, they're going to try to do that. And it might not be in their wheelhouse to take that particular approach, right? Another approach might be more sensitive for them. So again, we try to give them multiple options, but without telling them, here's what you should. Here's the option that you should take. Here's Jim Cat sitting in the kitchen window. This also means that writers need to do a little bit of preparation in order to come work with a peer. Okay. First of all, they have to have a goal in mind. They have to have something achievable to think about for this piece of writing. And they also have to have something achievable for this session. Okay. Generally, sessions last in the range of 30 to 60 minutes. That depends. I mean, you can also imagine a situation in which a writer is coming at that planning stage. Here are my ideas, and they have a 20-minute conversation and they're done. And then hopefully they'll come back later on. So it depends. It also depends on what's going on in the center at that time. Are we experiencing a rush? But we don't have to get into the nitty gritty of that. Writers also have to contemplate their own intentionality. So we talked about moves, right? And this is something that all of us as writers do. But our students don't always think about the intentionality. If I do X, what is that actually achieving? Why would I choose to do X over Y, right? They don't always think about that. Many of them do, but they don't always. So you want to help prime them by at least talking about agency in their writing. And thinking about, or rather, intentionality in their writing.
Self-awareness.
Self-awareness. Self-awareness. Right? Like, what can I reasonably say? Like, from my lived experience. Right? And also, in a healthy session, I believe there's a shifting role of expertise, where at times the writer, right, your student plays the role of expert. Right? Well, here is what I've done so far. Here's what I was hoping to achieve if they've thought about their intentionality to at least a small degree, right? They can take on some of that expertise, and that helps further break down that idea of power in the writing center. Okay, and now the writing center in your classroom. Here's Archie. You probably noticed over the past few pictures that my pets really like this chair, to the point that I almost never sit in it because I become a fur ball if I do. But now let's look about how these things play out in the writing center. As I say here, vary your assignments much like baby girl Darius receiving. If I can't find her in the winter and I look all over the house, there's an 80% chance she's sitting on the boiler. And then my anxious mind's like, oh my God, the boiler pressure is going to explode or something. Anyway, right? Vary your assignments. So for example, think about genre, right? Think about audience. And while, like, so for example, if you have your students do reading reflections, right, or reading responses or something like that, that's a perfectly normal genre, right? But also help them experience writing to different audiences, not just sharing their ideas with you as a professor. Perhaps even giving them a hypothetical audience that they need to reach. Thinking about genres, right, and the different forms, right? Try to vary, right, what you're asking your students to write, whom they're addressing, and so on. And rather than teaching, in this assignment, you have to do X, and what's important in this assignment is X, back up and take that from a broader perspective and think about how X, this particular assignment, is an example of this particular genre. Okay, so in your own fields, your own disciplines, right? So for example, we see a number of students, and my colleague Maria, who I believe is on Zoom, works with graduate students, and she sees this in the graduate program for social work as well. Often they'll be asked to write a policy brief, right? And looking into a particular situation, looking into the legal layers, the social layers, and so on, and making a recommendation to an agency or a governmental body or a legislative body to make changes, right? Teaching, not in this assignment you have to do X, but backing up and looking at multiple examples of that genre, so that the writers are actually familiar with what is the purpose of that genre, what are they hoping to achieve, what are the norms of that genre, right? You can help them do that, right? And it makes more transferable sense for them as writers to have it couched in genre than it does to be, this is what this assignment is about, hands down. Right. So taking time, taking at least a class, right, to have had your students read through several examples of this, perhaps have taught them about moves and intentionality, and ask them as they read, right, to go through and find pieces of intentionality in the writer's work, in that policy brief or whatever it is. Highlight those transferable writing concepts in your classes, in your assignments, as I was just talking about, right? Make sure that your students are approaching it not as I'm writing to you as professor necessarily, right? But I have somebody I'm hoping to reach and a purpose I'm trying to get through to them. Encourage, again, thinking about process. Encourage them to come and work with peer writers at varying stages. Encourage them, right? Especially if they're unsure of how to go forward with the assignment. Not just to talk to you, but to come talk with one of us in the writing center as well. Make that peer-to-peer connection. This is a cameo by Elsie DiGiorgio sitting under my butt here, and a cameo of a younger me. But de-emphasize grammar and punctuation. Grammar and punctuation are not writing. Mechanics are not writing, right? Do they play a role? Sure. Okay, but they themselves are not writing. And you, I mean, how many of you had an English teacher? And again, we're looking at, different eras and so on, but how many of you had an English teacher who in high school or middle school, you just got corrections, grammar, spelling, right? You didn't actually learn anything about making an argument. You didn't learn anything about addressing an audience. You didn't learn anything useful, right? And let's face it, yeah, am I annoyed when people use the wrong your? Yeah, sure. But can I tell what they're saying? Yes, it's not a big deal. And some people are going to say that sounds radical, but Eddie, academic writing, yes, I know, but maybe we have to change how we think about writing more broadly. Okay, there's my radical side.
But when you say that, though, when you're going into a field where even small grammatical errors can be torn apart, like an officer on a stand testifying,
That's true.
you can't de-emphasize that stuff. That stuff's got to be, their reports have to be exactly right, because a lawyer will say, well, you made a mistake about that. Did you make a mistake about anything else that you testified to? So, I see in certain fields you can say that, but in certain fields like criminal justice, you can't say that.
Well, I get that, but I would also say that if you're going to take that route, at least emphasize the other aspects.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
When we teach grammar and punctuation at best, and then there's a lot of research, and again, you're right, there are different professional applications. But there is a lot of research that indicates that harping on these sorts of things has no impact at best and has a negligible impact at worst, right? Especially when we look at the idea of standard English, right? And how, again, different genres of writing are going to be more attached to that than others. But when we're talking about standard English, we're talking about an English that has been developed in middle and upper class white areas, right? So we also have to be aware of those dimensions, right, to these conversations. Again, de-emphasize formatting to an extent, right? And certainly in the writing center, I'll add, we do help with these things, right? But it's not at the center of what we do, because it's not at the center of what writing itself is. So again, thinking, well, we're just about out of time. Give specific feedback, right? The more specific you can be for your students, whether or not they work with a peer writer in the future, the better, right? If you're going to leave them an end note and say this assignment does not achieve this goal, right? Make sure you're pointing to specific moves they're making that show that they're not achieving that goal, or call their goal into question, right? I'm going to skip to, you can encourage your students to work with peer writers, but don't mandate it. When you mandate it, you take away agency. They don't have a goal. I'm here because my professor said so. So you can strongly encourage them. I'll also point out that if you're interested in working with the Writing Center, whether on publishing about Grandma's House Theorem or not, there are some things you can do, right? Every spring when I teach the practicum, well, I just started this past spring, we do what's called the genre project. And so faculty send in samples of assignments that they do in their classes. And what we do as a group is we look at the commonalities among those assignments. And then what we do is we create how-to guides for particular genres. So getting to understand the genre a little bit better. So for example, this past spring, one of them was literature reviews, right? So thinking through the purpose of a literature review, what you're trying to do, and so on. So if you're interested in getting involved with the Writing Center that way, please reach out this semester. Consider building writing center involvement into your assignments. And like I said, you can encourage your students to come work with us at different stages. And if you want to make that a very strong recommendation in your assignments, talk with me about that. We can sort of coordinate how that would work and perhaps even help. We do tutoring essentially on an entirely walk-in basis, but we can perhaps coordinate appointments for your class, for your students. I've got my contact information here. And if you have new ideas, more things you'd like to see us do, share them with me, please. Yeah, I have strong opinions, but I'm also open to changing those. Yeah.
So encouraging your students to come in logistically for the peer writers, is it better for them to come in with a hard copy of what they've started rather than here, you got to look at this on my laptop or
No difference.
No difference? Okay.
The peer writers work with writers on different modes or in different modes. In some sense, like you said, it's even entirely virtual. And most of them do all their writing. So they're generally comfortable.
Okay.
But what I would say, I don't know if I said this, whatever your students want to do, if they're more comfortable with it on paper, whatever, bring it. I know I talked for way too long. Sorry, Renee.
What kind of help can the Writing Center give to English language? Like, I'm not sure if that's the correct term anymore, but.
So from time to time, what we've done is we've scheduled them with particular peer writers so for example, I'm thinking of one peer writer I have right now in Stockton, the literature program, who's taken Tom Kinsella's grammar course, right, which isn't necessarily about correctness, but at least the structure and function of grammar. So we could get them working with somebody who's out of the grammar. I actually do love grammar. I love playing with grammar. I think it's like one of the neatest things.
Diagramming sentences.
Oh boy, yes, I have. And that's something.
Yeah.
Other questions? Other thoughts?
How do you? I've experienced some weird thing, and probably because I was the opposite, where students are like, I chose my major because I wouldn't have to write. Right? I was the other way. I was like, I chose my major because I didn't have to do math. So is there some things you can sort of do to help them overcome that belief, like, oh, I can't write, or I'm afraid of writing?
Yeah. And some of this is sort of built on that idea, right? That if you're not approaching a tutor, you're approaching a peer.
Right.
It's not about I'm bad at this.
Right.
Right. So we take that seriously.
Yeah.
When I visit classes, I make a big deal that I talk about my own use of the peer writings and having them help me. And I mean, let's face it, some of that it's not an overnight change.
No, right. Absolutely not.
Yeah, it's the same thing with students who are afraid of math. Right, it takes time and then hammering in of this again, peer relationship, and of the fact that like remind them you write all the time.
Right.
Right, you're sending text messages every day. You're engaging with memes. Right, perhaps, which are a genre.
Communicating, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Anything we can do in our assignments to help that? I mean, anything like.
So Heather McGovern, who teaches in first year writing and has been our long-term first year studies chair, has done an awesome meme assignment. And I'll just mention memes. But right at the start of the semester, where she has the students like, you have to construct a meme like achieving X, Y, or Z. Right. I did something similar in the practicum this past spring, where the Writing Center has an Instagram page. Which I didn't put up here. It's at Stockton_Writing Center. I think that's it. We don't do it very often, but I had them, you have to put together a hypothetical Instagram post for the Writing Center that we might actually post at a future. So again, engaging in sort of like their something they're more comfortable with in terms of writing that can sort of flip this idea of, oh, writing is this big scary thing where you're writing 12-page papers and you have to have all these ideas, right? And starting somewhere else, somewhere more relatable. Some are more, not just relatable, but experienced by me. Other thoughts or questions?
Just real quick, I know this is an in-depth question, but how do you feel about ChatGPT?
On one level, things haven't changed, and on another serious level, things have totally changed. On the things have not changed level is, our peer writers are still looking at voice. And especially if they're familiar with a writer who's coming from time to time, they get a sense for their voice. Or they might just get a sense this person sounds kind of robotic, right? And of course, ChatGPT has evolved. It's getting a little bit better. So using their nose to sort of sniff out things that don't sound like the student hasn't changed. What they do have to address, though, is the university at present doesn't have a policy on AI. And I was on the task force that made recommendations about how we should update our policies to incorporate things about AI. And the recommendation we made essentially was that the university should make it faculty by faculty, because different faculty may have different reasons for actually bringing AI into the classroom. So the tutor plays, again, the role of, I'm going to give you some information, right? You need to know your professor's policy on AI. You have to be aware that if they don't want you to use AI, this is academic dishonesty, it's plagiarism, right? And you can be charged with that and face other repercussions. I don't want to take any more questions now just because you've been so patient with me already. If you do ever come up with anything, again, I have my contact information here. I'll be here every day until the end. So drop by J105, even email me, call me, and we can talk it through. But I welcome those conversations. They're one of my favorite things about the market.
And we will be posting the recorded version of this talk on the SFT website. And thank you so much for this awesome presentation.
Thank you all.
And I don't think I saw any questions on Zoom, but it's possible. I'll check. Any day until the end.
Yeah, I usually say I'll be here every day until I die. But,
Well, that also sounds awesome.
I like
yeah,
that.
I thought the end might sound better, but no, it didn't.
All right. Anybody in Zoom land, I'm going to stop the session real quick and then reopen it. So just for the next session. That way, both recordings aren't tied together on my Zoom on my Zoom recordings.
Yes, I think that would be.
Wednesdays at
Okay, I don't know that.
3:35 to 5.
Might actually be able to stop it.
It is.